How does a scooter company go from this to this in 5 years? In 2019, not long after rental scooters started just showing up everywhere across North America, Apollo started a scooter company for riders who wanted a scooter to call their own. And since then, there have been 26 different models and generations of scooters that have worn the Apollo name, and we've tested 24 of them. So what I'm doing today is we've gathered together examples of every Apollo electric scooter ever made, and I'm gonna review them all. And we'll get a glimpse of a possible future scooter from Apollo as well. So if you like electric scooters, stick around, because the evolution of electric scooters has been pretty incredible in such a short period of time. And you're gonna see that today, because the story of Apollo is in some way the story of the electric scooter industry. The beginning was anything but glamorous. Back then, they weren't designing scooters or manufacturing scooters at all. Like pretty much every other scooter company in North America, the guys at Apollo just saw a huge demand here for electric scooters and decided to go shopping overseas. They found popular scooters that already existed, imported them by the containerful, put big Apollo logos on them, and sold them with warranty and tech support. So in 2019, the very first scooters Apollo imported were Xiaomi M365s, and very basic scooters by today's standards. But it was also the best-selling electric scooter in the world, as well as the #1 rental scooter and the world's most copied design. M365s were light at 27 pounds, relatively cheap, selling at about $499, and had 250-watt motors that went a not so impressive 16.7 miles per hour. But they were a lot of fun to hack for more speed with the Xiao Flasher app, and they had an official app as well. But they also had some things missing, like suspension or even a speedometer. The dashboard was literally just 4 dots that made up your battery gauge, but they did have air-filled tires to smooth out the ride a little. So that was the start right here, but today we're in a completely different era defined by this scooter right here, the Apollo Pro, released in 2024. Now we've got scooters with tubeless self-healing tires. This one's got wireless charging for your phone, and you can use the app as a display or the built-in display, where this one just kind of didn't have a display at all. We've got cellular tracking for security and water resistance that's almost as good as my motorcycles. 2019 doesn't seem like that long ago, but time is different when you measure it in scooter years. It's like we went from dinosaurs to flying cars in 5 years. Let's see how we got from here to here. The next scooter that they brought out had a speedometer, suspension, and was the world's second most popular rental scooter, the Segway Ninebot ES4. I used to run a repair warehouse full of these. They were also fairly light at just 32 pounds, had 300-watt motors, and were reasonably reliable, but the ride quality kind of sucked because they had solid tires and the front suspension made an awful noise over bumps. These basically only had regen brakes. I mean, there was a stomp brake out back, but in an emergency, by the time you got your foot on it, you probably didn't need to stop anymore. So those were both single motor scooters, but it didn't take long before they added something with a lot more power, the 1,000-watt Mercane Wide Wheel Pro, which despite its slim looks, weighed twice as much as the M365, 55.8 pounds. It had dual motors, full suspension, and tires that looked like they belong on a steamroller. But the flat profile solid tires meant that when you lean into a corner, the handling can get weird. But in 2020, we get into the good stuff, the first Apollo scooters that had their own look. Wait, before you start typing comments, I hear you. Yes, the Zero scooters looked a lot like these, and they're all made by Titan Unicool. There's one now. Yes, this entire series had the exact same shape and size as some scooters by other companies like Zero, because they're all manufactured by a company called Titan Unicool. But aside from the red and blue, there are also invisible differences, which we'll cover in a minute. So the most important thing that's changed by the time we get to 2020 is Apollo is now just big enough to spec out scooters with their own identity and to spec exactly how they want their scooters built. You can see that in the cool pattern deck design, but there's a lot of stuff you couldn't see. The Apollo scooters used 9-volt battery cells, where the other Titan variants, as we call them, might use just whatever generic cells were available that day. Apollo also had some control over the firmware and specified some waterproofing, though this generation of scooters was still far from waterproof. But they were among the first scooter companies to start at least trying to specify an IP rating. And they were also the first scooters I know of to have a 2-year warranty. So this differentiation gives us a glimpse into some of the reliability related work that they do later on. The Apollo Lite was the smallest scooter in Apollo's 2020 lineup. It has a 350-watt motor and a tested top speed of 22 miles per hour, so it went almost as fast and as far as the Wide Wheel Pro, but it's much lighter and easier to carry, weighing 38.6 pounds. It was an entry-level commuter and, like the M365, had no front brake, but it does have full suspension. All three of Apollo's entry-level scooters have folding bars, a collapsible stem, and a similar folding mechanism. The Apollo Light set the bar for what an entry-level Apollo scooter would be, and from here onward, the M365 is gone, and there would never be a cheap Apollo scooter. Their next larger scooter for 2020 was the original Apollo City, with a single 600-watt motor, and it was made for city commuting. The Apollo City was basically a scaled-up Apollo Light with 2 brakes, a bigger battery, and cost $949. For that, you got a top speed of 28.6 miles per hour, quite a bit faster than its 25-mile-per-hour spec, and 17.9 miles of range. And it was just 4 pounds heavier, so unless you absolutely didn't have the extra $150, the City was really the way to go. You'll see later that the name of this scooter comes back on a much improved city commuter in 2022. The Apollo Explorer is one of the biggest, baddest single motor scooters ever made. And for a long time, it was really only matched by the eMove Cruiser. It had a single 1,000-watt motor in an era where 250-watt motors were still pretty common. The hill climbing power and enormous deck made it a favorite of bigger, heavier riders. Its range wasn't on the same level as the eMove Cruiser, but it had better acceleration and was, to my eyes, a better looking scooter, especially at night. In fact, the cool stem and deck lighting probably inspired later scooters, like the current model Apollo Pro. Ironically, the Zero scooters we talked about earlier, which are from Singapore, according to the Zero website, are currently banned in Singapore, and this is because they aren't UL certified. We'll talk about UL certification later. Let's go look at the Apollo Pro. And this is probably not the scooter you were expecting, but this is the original Apollo Pro, the 2020 flagship. This actual scooter is the first Apollo scooter I ever rode when I joined ESG in 2020, and I still remember how much it scared me with the way the front wheel would spin every time I take off from a stop. It was a flagship in every sense. It was a $2,500 dual motor, fire-breathing beast with 10-inch tires, hydraulic brakes, and LG battery cells. It was just bonkers. The suspension had really long travel, but no damping at all, so you just sort of float along at 42 miles per hour. Then things got crazy with the Apollo Pro Ludicrous. It looked exactly like the Pro here, except that it had dual thumb throttles and no display at all. It sold for $34.99, which at the time was a nearly unheard of price for a scooter, but it was super cool, and unfortunately we didn't get to keep it. To my knowledge, it was the first appearance of a thumb regen brake on a high-powered sports scooter. It used an ultra-exotic Stormcore motor controller by Lacroix, so you could control your performance settings with an app. This is also the first appearance of the Ludicrous name on an Apollo scooter, and it was completely appropriate because this thing blew through our hill climb test so fast we couldn't stop at the top of the hill. That scooter broke every acceleration and speed record we had. And this reminds me of an Apollo model we never had a chance to test. In fact, there are 2 variants, the Apollo Ultra and Ultra Ludo. These 2 scooters are so rare I've never seen one in person, and I think only a handful of Ultra Ludos were ever made. They were basically earlier versions of what would become the Visette 11 Plus and Super 72. I can only give you the specs for the Ultra and Ultra Ludo since we've never tested them. They were $35.99 for the Ultra and $44.99 for the Ultra Ludo, with claimed top speeds of around 60 miles per hour and claimed weights of 127 pounds, making them some of the first scooters that were so heavy that they arrived strapped to their own pallet and you needed a forklift to get them off the truck. I'm going to jump ahead by 1 scooter here to 2021 and the original Apollo Phantom because it was the most memorable scooter launch ever and completely changed our expectations of what a sports scooter should be. January 22nd, 2021, and the whole scooter world just came to a complete stop. I remember that day there were 5 of us at ESG and we were all packed around one monitor watching Apollo's live announcement on YouTube. Now we call it the Apollo Phantom V1, but at the time it was just the Apollo Phantom, their new flagship dual motor sports scooter. This was by far Apollo's most important scooter to date because it was their first in-house design and shared no parts in common with the scooters that came before it. It was also the best selling to date with about $250,000 in sales in the first month. Phantom V1 had a lot of firsts. It still had tubed 10-inch tires like the other dual motor sports scooters at the time, but it was the first to calculate remaining range, the first sports scooter to shed the ubiquitous QSS4 display in favor of a huge central display. The low headlights of the Apollo Pro were gone in favor of a high headlight so you could see further down the road, and most importantly, the new stem latch made the whole scooter feel more solid and signaled the beginning of the end for the old wobbly round style stem clamps used by pretty much all the sports scooters of the time. It was a huge step forward from the 2020 Pro in ride quality. When the Phantom came out, it completely stole the thunder of another Apollo scooter that had just come out at the end of 2020. The original Apollo Ghost, which for 2024 is gone, officially removed from the 2024 Apollo lineup. With a launch price of just $14.99, we called it No Frills, High Thrills because while it retained a lot of the older style features like the QSS4 type display and the old style stem clamp, the performance from the Ghost's dual 800-watt motors seemed impossibly good for the price. It got its name because its skeletal frame meant you could see right through the neck and swing arms. This was the last Apollo scooter which wasn't an original Apollo design. In 2022, we tested the updated Ghost, now sporting 1,000-watt motors, though acceleration stayed the same because the motor controllers were the same as 2021, and motor controller amps, not the motors, determined performance. But the changes that we had been hoping for back in 2021 but didn't get finally arrived in 2022. They got rid of the Ghost circular style stem latch in favor of this modern vice grip style latch. The next model they launched after the Phantom actually consisted of two fairly different looking scooters, the 2021 Apollo Air and Apollo Air Pro. These didn't make as big a splash when they arrived because that's the nature of being the smallest in the family. But they may have been more important than even the Phantom because the Apollo Air was our first glimpse of a new generation of scooters. Apollo had now taken over an entire floor of a different scooter factory, and this was their very first scooter model from a factory that would later make the new Apollo City, the new Pro, and the new Go. At launch, the base model Air cost $799 and had a 250-watt motor, and the 350-watt Air Pro was $999. They were single-motor entry-level scooters which had much better ride quality than the old Apollo Lite due to having 10-inch tires versus the Lite's 8.5-inch tires. And the new Air scooters had better frames, and the Pro had motorcycle-style front suspension. However, the smaller battery in the base model Air meant it had shorter range than the Apollo Lite, and the base model Air's hill climbing wasn't great. In 2022, both the Air and Air Pro were replaced by the new Apollo Air 2022, which was confusing. It sounded like they had kept the base model, but the Air 2022 was actually an improved version of the Pro. It had a much larger battery, higher top speed, more range, and better acceleration than the previous Air Pro. Then for 2023, once again, higher top speed, more range, and better acceleration. But this time the real news was it picked up a ton of features from the flagship Apollo Pro, and this is a real peek ahead at some of the very latest scooters, so I'm just going to list the upgrades here and describe them in detail when we get to the completely new models that arrived in 2023 and 24. The quickest model update ever had to be the 2022 Apollo Phantom V2, arriving about 8 months after the first shipment of the V1. In fact, some Phantom V1 owners were caught a little off guard by it. It didn't help that news had also just come out about a small number of V1s and developing cracks in their frames. So now the new V2s were coming out, had much thicker frames, a brighter display, smoother throttle with less dead zone, plug-and-play cabling, and a much stronger kickstand. And normally you'd expect that V1 owners would have to go kick rocks, but Apollo gave every Phantom V1 owner a free upgrade kit that included a brace to make the frame stronger, a new display, a new throttle, new kickstand, new control switches, and a new front cover for the scooter, basically upgrading everybody to the new V2. I wish car companies did that. All in all, the model change to Phantom V2 is more of a refinement and bug fix than a major upgrade. Performance was slightly better across the board, and more importantly, throttle response was much smoother. So then in 2023 came the Phantom V3 with Ludo mode, and my favorite thing about the V3 surprisingly wasn't Ludo mode, but the addition of a variable regen brake lever on the left side that charges your battery as you slow down. It's absolutely addictive and feels like a rubber band pulling you backwards when you brake. It's something you kind of have to experience firsthand. The V3 also got a new display, turn signals on all 4 corners of the deck, and for the first time got the app that the City and the Air already had. It also came with Ludicrous mode, Ludo mode for short, and it was faster than the V2, finally breaking the 40-mile-per-hour barrier. It wasn't as scary fast as we thought it would be though, and I'm going to put an asterisk here. Our V3 was one of the early ones that didn't have the Mach 1 controller mounted externally, so it's possible we haven't experienced everything that Ludo mode can fully do. Oh, and once again, Apollo offered a path for owners of earlier Phantoms to upgrade to the V3. This time it wasn't free, but it came with a new display, new throttle, a dedicated regen brake lever, and the new Mach 1 controller. So you guys may not have heard about this one yet. In September 2023, Apollo quietly started shipping the Phantom V4, which we haven't tested yet. Unlike the major update from V2 to V3, the V4 was also more of a refinement like the V1 to V2. It comes with updated throttles, which are the same ones used on the latest Apollo Pro, and the V4 gets improved motor casings, an updated steering stem, and a 10,000-kilometer frame warranty. Another scooter duo that arrived in 2022 were the single-motor Apollo City and the dual-motor Apollo City Pro. Pro. The new Apollo City scooters were the second Apollo models to use the Apollo app and the first Apollo scooters to come with self-healing tubeless tires. Like the Apollo Air introduction, the first year we got two scooters, a single motor base model, the Apollo City, and the dual motor Apollo City Pro. These featured full suspension, the highest water resistance we'd ever seen, and were designed for serious crosstown commuting. It had the hill climbing power that was missing from the original 2020 City, tons of suspension travel, and enough range to cross San Francisco 3 times in one charge. So we did. Ramir raced it against my car across San Francisco, and no surprise, the scooter won. We'll link that video right here if you want to see it. For 2023, those were both replaced by a single model, which once again confusingly used the same name as the previous base model, but once again was a level up from the previous City Pro model and had a way bigger battery. It also got more top speed and, more importantly, a hugely upgraded cockpit with the same grips, levers, buttons, and bar and turn signals as the Apollo Pro, plus the upgraded steering stem latch, just like the Apollo Air 2023. One feature that often gets overlooked is the toolkit, and for 2023 onward, all Apollo scooters get what may be the best toolkit that comes with any electric scooter. And seriously, let me know in the comments if you've seen a better one. The Apollo toolkit comes in a zipper pouch and includes tools, spare turn signal covers, an air pump, an extension for the pump, and more importantly, a spare copy of every nut and bolt used in the scooter and a map that shows you where they all go. Okay, so now the grand finale, the very latest Apollo scooters. Let's start with the flagship Apollo Pro. And this time it's the new one, not the blue one. It's so hard to describe this scooter in just a few lines, not just the look, but the ride quality, the feature set, because they're just so far beyond where we started this video back in 2018, 2019. In fact, when we reviewed it, we called the beta version the best overall design of 2023. Full disclosure, 2 of us at Electric Scooter Guide actually own Apollo Pros, and after having it for a while, maybe the best way to describe the ride quality is that it's just effortless to ride really fast. The smooth throttle, the smooth regen brakes, plus the huge 12-inch self-healing tires and full suspension. It's like new skis versus old crappy skis, or a new computer versus an old computer. Build quality is basically as high as it gets, with Samsung battery cells, a SIM card that you can use to track the scooter and even shut it down remotely from anywhere in the world, fully tunable lights that can even double as a battery gauge, a clamshell deck that seals shut with a rubber O-ring in the middle, turn signals everywhere, and a choice of using your phone as a display or the dot matrix display. Oh, and it charges your phone while you ride. The grips, levers, turn signals, and stem latch we've been seeing on all the other 2023 models started right here on the Pro. Are the dots on the dot matrix a nod to their origins with the M365? Probably not. But at one point in development planning, the Pro was on the verge of becoming only the second Apollo scooter ever with no display at all, the first being the 2020 Pro Ludo. But we're glad they changed their mind. The Pro was also the first time we've seen a public beta test program where 150 riders logged roughly 500 miles each and then reported back to Apollo before production of the final Apollo Pro began. And apparently they did that again with the Go, because even though it just came out, I've seen feedback from riders who have been riding around on them for a while. One feature that you'll see on all the latest Apollo scooters is the use of drum brakes. And the reason they brought back a feature that feels a little retro is that drums are more reliable. In fact, drum brake shoes will last at least 5 times longer than disc brake pads. Fans of disc brakes will tell you that drums don't have as much bite as disc brakes, and that's true. But the reason that drum brakes still work in this case is that all of these scooters also have, and I'm just gonna say it, the world's best regen brakes. So when you pair up the regen brakes with the drum brakes, you get very smooth braking that's almost as strong as discs, but also much easier to control at the absolute limit than discs. They toyed around with the idea of making them in chrome, but you can't actually get one. They only made maybe 5 of them that way, and this one is mine. It was just gonna cost too much, and it was gonna be a little heavier than the regular version. And finally, the very newest Apollo scooter, the Apollo Go. To me, this is like a mini Pro. I mean, just look at the cockpits. But let me describe where it fits in. Apollo Air and Apollo City were their best-selling scooters, but there was like an $800 to $900 price gap and a big gap in performance between the two models. So they brought out the Go to be an entry-level dual-motor scooter because Apollo knew there were people who needed to climb hills but didn't want a 60-pound scooter. It's literally the only dual-motor, full-suspension scooter we've tested that's under 50 pounds. So it weighs 6 pounds less than the single-motor 9 Max G2. And it brings almost all of the new features we saw first on the Apollo Pro down to an entry-level scooter. Bar and turn signals, look at this dash, and I love the narrow bars because these just fit in my trunk better. Power-wise, it's not a fire-breathing monster, it's just not that kind of dual-motor scooter. The Apollo City is really where the adrenaline starts in the Apollo lineup, but think of the Go as a smooth-riding hill climber and medium-distance commuter that you can haul upstairs. So a scooter we were hoping for but we didn't get in 2023 is the Apollo Explorer. I thought it looked like a fun concept with its side-by-side foot platforms and a removable battery in the middle. I've ridden scooters with side-by-side foot platforms before, and there are definitely things I like and don't like about that riding stance, but I feel like the Apollo Go has landed squarely in the space where the Explorer would have been, so I don't know if or when we'll see the Explorer return in 2024. The city gets updated for 2024 with a few internal tweaks, but we think it's going to look like the same scooter from the outside. Something important I should mention about all of the latest Apollo scooters, the Air, the City, the Go, and the Pro, is they're all UL 2272 and 2271 certified, which means you have scooters with safe battery charging, and all of them use top-shelf battery cells from EVE, except for the Pro, which uses top-shelf battery cells from Samsung. I love that with the latest upgrades, they've all picked up a lot of the feel of their flagship Apollo Pro. So that's how we got from here to here. These guys are a completely different company from how they started. They went from importing a few containers of scooters to now running an entire floor of a factory with their own employees and designing scooters from end to end. They also have a lot more pull with their suppliers now. Even back in 2020, when they were making the blue and white scooters, they were still kind of small enough volume that they couldn't always get what they wanted from the factories. But now that they're on their own factory floor, they can make 8 different versions of a throttle if they want to get just the one they want. What will they bring us in 2025? It's hard to say for sure, but if the trend continues, I expect we'll see them taking scooters in a direction that makes them more vehicle grade by increasing water resistance, improving ride quality, and making scooters last longer versus, chasing eye-watering speed. Instead, I expect they'll continue optimizing for these sub 40-mile-per-hour speeds that people really use the most. With their 100,000th scooter expected to sell this year and a team of 50 people on board now, they've got the horsepower to pull off some pretty cool stuff, so I can't wait to see what's coming next. For more details on all the current Apollo models, check the link in this video's description and use code RIDERGUIDE to save $50. I'm Paul from Electric Scooter Guide. Ride safe and don't forget to wear a helmet.